This is Saved by the 90s, the show about 90s films and the pop culture surrounding them. I'm your host, Adam Patterson. I'm joined today by the illustrious Ken Bakley, and I'd like to welcome you to July 1993.
Jurassic Park, where the giant dinosaurs live again, with all the excitement of the movie.
Dino damage!
Look for the JP mark, only at Jurassic Park.
The temperature's rising, school's out, and UB40's cover of Can't Help Falling in Love is rising on the charts thanks to its appearance in the soundtrack for the movie Sliver.
Fresh off his tenure as the narrator and sometimes director of The Wonder Years, which just ended in May, Daniel Stern, who's best known for his role as Marv in the Home Alone films, made his directorial debut in the film Rookie of the Year, released July 7th.
Henry Rowan-Gardner had a dream.
Rowan-Gardner, get it right!
Playing in the major leagues. Only one thing stood in his way.
Home!
Reality. Until one day, everything fell into place.
How long will he have to be in the cast?
August. And now rotate from the shoulder.
Oh! Whoa! Funky butt loving. Did he say funky butt loving?
Those tendons have healed a little tight.
Now, the kid who wasn't good enough for Little League is pitching.
Gosh, Henry, you can play for the Cubs. Hey,
In the big leagues.
I'm the new pitcher.
12-year-old Henry Rowan-Gardner, the youngest person in history to play Major League Baseball.
The majors
Hey, pitcher!
will be answering to a minor.
Pitcher's got a big butt. Pitcher's got a big butt.
Rookie of the Year.
When an accident miraculously gives a boy an incredibly powerful pitching arm, he becomes a major league pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. Ken, let's talk about Rookie of the Year. Now, I was 9 years old when this came out. You were...
-6.
-6. I was very much into baseball at this time in my life. I was obsessed with the Baltimore Orioles. I was an Orioles fan.
Mm-hmm.
So when this movie came out, I was absolutely obsessed. I saw this movie, I think, twice in the theater. And then when it hit pay-per-view, I recorded it on VHS off of pay-per-view. Back then, you could dial a number, and then you hit the number of which movie you want, and then it would play on that channel over and over. It would just keep playing on that channel over and over. And I recorded Rookie, not supposed to, obviously, but I recorded
from an
Rookie
early
of the
age.
Year. Yeah. Just a little pirate. I was. And I absolutely loved Rookie of the Year back then. Now, I have not seen Rookie of the Year probably since then. So I was a little nervous going into this about how it would hold up, what I would think about it now. And I'm actually happy to say that I think it did hold up for the most part. And I enjoyed revisiting Rookie of the Year. Now, was this a first time watch for you?
It's definitely the first time I've seen it all the way through. I feel like I'm just familiar with it as a concept. It's just one of those ideas that kind of sticks around in the culture, I guess. Just all of these conceptually insane 90s kids movies that my idea is that they play like you took the daydreams of like a 10-year-old boy and then put it into a screenplay without any modification at all and just let it happen.
Oh yeah. I mean, this was like a dream movie for me. That's why I loved it so much, because I played baseball. I loved baseball, but I was horrible at baseball, just like Henry Rowan-Gardner was.
I could also regale you with tales of my ineptitude at Little League.
Yeah, I loved it, but I was so bad.
I didn't
so
even
bad.
love it. It was just me embarrassing and injuring myself.
I mean, that happened a lot too. The embarrassment, the injury, all of that. Yeah, definitely. But this is in a long line of 90s sports movies. We had Angels in the Outfield, The Mighty Ducks. There was 3 of those Mighty Ducks movies. I think there was a Little Giants that came out during that time. There was The Big Green, which was a soccer movie. There was The Sandlot. Probably the most famous of them was the Sandlot. I think Sandlot came out earlier in the year of 93. This movie stars Thomas Ian Nicholas as Henry. Kid loves baseball. He sucks at it. And one day one of the bullies at his school tosses him a ball and he goes to catch it, but he slips on another baseball that happens to be just so perfectly placed in his way, and he breaks his arm, or it's his more like it's his shoulder.
They spend a lot of time trying to justify the anatomy of this, even though it's just patently absurd and they know it. They spend multiple scenes trying to explain exactly what is causing this, which I admire.
So he breaks his shoulder, and after 4 months in a huge cast, I mean, this cast goes from his wrist all the way up to his chest. This is an enormous cast.
I almost wonder if this would have been a better movie if it was just about like him being in that cast the whole time. It would have been a completely different movie. It would have been a more wide-ranging movie. It was just about this kid has to spend his summer in an incredibly uncomfortable position with horrible blood circulation in this cast, and it always looks like he has his hand raised.
Yeah, and just him doing the day-to-day stuff. I could watch a whole movie of him just struggling to live his life in this position.
I found that montage fascinating.
So he gets the cast off after 4 months, and they discover that the tendons have fused to something else. They're super tight, and they have caused this sort of the slingshot effect with his arm, where when he stretches his arm back, it kind of snaps, and it allows him to throw a ball really fast. He's chucking 103-mile-an-hour fastballs at this point, which is pretty impressive. Which leads to one of the more famous lines where the doctor says, "Funky butt lovers." Or something.
Yeah. I kind of just paused the movie there very briefly and went back and played that again to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah, I think it's a funky butt loving. Then the kid even repeats it. He's like, "Did you just say funky butt loving?"
That line is more profane than whatever swear word they had that it's a replacement for in a PG movie.
Well, there's also the scene near the beginning when Henry and his friends are at lunch and they're eating lunch and they're talking about this girl that he has a crush on. And he's like, she's not into me. And he's like, she's not even that hot anyway. And his friend goes, "Not that hot. She's stacked." And I was thinking to myself, yep, you would not get away with that today in a PG rated kids movie. That wouldn't happen. This
is something we're going to come back to a lot, especially if we cover more and more of these 90s kids movies. It's just so many things that do not pass any kind of test of what you would put in a kids movie in 2018.
It's also funny because we, off the air last week, we were literally talking about how movies have gotten more tame over the years, gradually, since starting in probably the 80s till now. We've seen movies become gradually more tame, and I just think that this is a perfect example of it right here. The stuff you could get away with saying in 1993 in Rookie of the Year.
I will say that the line "she's stacked" in a movie about, middle schoolers is, I can deal with the fact that that's not acceptable to say anymore.
Well, I think that it's not that it's not acceptable to say. I mean, you have to expect any kind of adolescent kid saying that. I think it's just odd it's in this movie, that it's in this particular movie. Now, if this was like a PG-13 movie and there was a little bit more kind of
then
raunchy or teen humor in it,
then you wouldn't think about it. But
yeah, it wouldn't feel as out of place.
It's just fascinating that is, and there are tons of little moments like that in this movie, that it's something that's included in a movie that's aimed for a younger audience than just like a PG-13 movie aimed at like slightly older kids.
Well, the other odd thing about this movie that I don't know would fly anymore is the fact that Gary Busey plays the romantic interest in this as Chet Steadman, the Cubs pitcher, who sort of takes Henry under his wing after he comes on board. So Busey as a love interest is just such an odd thing. I mean, even 93, it seems like an odd thing.
His presence hangs over the scenes, even the ones that he's not in, that Gary Busey is playing that character in this movie. He's just always there in your mind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He chews up scenery, that Busey. As soon as he becomes present.
He is always present.
And of course, you have Daniel Stern as Brickma, who is the comic relief, if you want to call him that. He's the goofball on the team who's always pounding sunflower seeds and getting himself trapped in between doors, and he's
having a very hard time.
Yeah. I mean, what's going on in his life would be my question. He seems like such a lonely guy.
That's the thing about movies like these, when they have so many eccentric supporting characters, is that you really start to wonder about their lives. Like, you just want a movie about each of them.
Yeah. So Henry gets this amazing ability. He gets found by the Cubs after he goes to a game and they hit a ball into the stands. He throws it back and it's incredible. And somehow they have him try out and then bring him onto the team. This kid is 11 years old and they bring him on. Now, I don't know if somehow the Major League Baseball can get around child labor laws or what, but
yeah,
they bring this kid on the team.
It's pretty great how this movie is so eager just to get that logline going. He's on the team. He's on this Major League Baseball team, that they just blow past all of the details of like trying to convince everyone that a kid should be on a Major League Baseball team, and basically everybody just accepts it near instantaneously.
I like how there's one scene where they put him up to bat, because in baseball everybody's got a bat. So it seems like they didn't even think about that until the actual game, where they were like, oh yeah, we forgot to teach this kid how to swing a baseball bat. And it just calls into question the competence of this, the managers of this team. Like they seem so clueless as to how to run a baseball team here.
Yeah, well, that's almost a kind of recurring factor that you could find in any movie of this type, is that you have all of these adults in positions of authority and they're all just sort of comically incompetent. But it's not even the focus. It's just a taken fact, rather a given fact that they're just sort of jumping way ahead of themselves here.
Yeah, so the film is sort of about just being a kid and embracing the fact that you're a kid, because sort of the through line is that he and his friends are building this boat, and he just wants to be a kid. But once he joins the Cubs, this sort of gets taken away from him, and he can't be a kid anymore. So, and then there's also the idea that, you know, you're putting you're putting a kid on a baseball team with adult men, and he's gonna flip the script. He's gonna change everything, and he's gonna teach these guys to be a kid again and embrace the kid in us all. And I thought that for the most part, it didn't really work. I wasn't really on board with the conflict between him and his friends, because it just felt so secondary, and like it seemed to happen very quickly and was resolved very quickly.
It comes up, peaks as a conflict, and then resolves itself within 3 scenes about 2/3 of the way through.
And I know that this wouldn't make for good kids movie viewing, but they should have. Well, actually, you know what? Maybe it would have. He was making a shitload of money. Like, they didn't really dive into that. So his mom's boyfriend decides to become his manager because he sees him as like a cash cow. So he is getting him these sponsorship deals, and he's negotiating his contract with the Cubs and all of this stuff. And he's getting 10% of it, of course. And at one point they even mention like how much he's going to be getting if this like team transfer goes through to the Yankees. And while they don't say how much he's currently making, you have to assume that it's in millions. It's in the millions. And I think that they had a sort of a missed opportunity there of just showing off, because this kid's rich now, right? So like, why didn't they show him like rolling up to school in like this crazy new bike or a limo, or have him be wearing like fancy clothes or something, or the boat scene, for instance, where, you know, they're putting together this boat from these like junkyard parts that they're finding and stuff. Why doesn't he bring them like this brand new motor that's like super high powered or something?
Yeah, if there's one through line through a lot of 90s kids movies based on common daydreams, it's just kids that become absurdly rich and then can indulge all of their sort of kid fantasies with effectively limitless amounts of money.
And they didn't have to make it like a prominent thing, but just mention it, because they don't even really mention the fact that this kid is rich now.
And it would have come back and fed into the conflict between the friends.
Yeah, and it also would have made the conflict with the boyfriend, his mom's boyfriend, it would have given that more weight, because he turns into kind of a and I think that it would have been more impactful if now he's showing off the money, like he's wearing these fancy oversized 90s suits and all that stuff. But I think that it would have had a little bit more weight if the money was a more prominent thing, more prominent factor. And I mean, you have movies like Blank Check and First Kid and all of these other movies where kids are, I mean, Richie Rich too, I guess the Macaulay Culkin one.
It's right there in the title.
Yeah, you have these movies where kids are incredibly rich and living out their dreams and doing crazy stuff like buying giant ball pits and stuff like that.
It's like the most expensive house on the market in America right now is this gigantic mansion where the price itself is part of the stunt, and it comes fully furnished. And one of the features in it is this giant wall that's made entirely out of candy dispensers, and it feels like it just emerged from one of these movies. I wanted more giant candy dispenser walls in Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to go that far with it, because movies like Blank Check were coming out around this time, and like they covered that. But just to at least touch on the fact that he's rich now, I think it's just odd that they wouldn't dive into that at all.
Yeah, the character, the titular Rookie of the Year, is surprisingly not really an entity in the movie as a person. He's just the analog for the viewer that's thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I was playing Major League Baseball?
Yeah, which, again, even that, they barely get into. Like he first joins the team. Nobody respects him. Nobody knows him. They don't really like this kid. And then by the end of the movie, of course, they all love him. But there's not much of there's no real journey there, because at first it's just like he's on the team, nobody likes him, then he starts winning for them, and then they all love him, and then that's it. You know, there is more of an arc with the relationship he has with Busey's character, because Busey is Chet Stedman. He's training him to be a better pitcher, because when he first joins the team, of course, he has no accuracy at all, and Chet is training him to be a better pitcher. But as far as like the other, like life as a ball player, you don't see a lot of that. You see very small glimpses of it. I did enjoy the Pepsi scene though, because that felt very of the time, where he's doing a Diet Pepsi commercial with the Ray Charles music.
It's truly a masterpiece.
You got the right one, baby. Oh man, that was a huge campaign. Lasted a really long time. I don't know. What did you think about the team dynamic? Like him being on the team. Do you agree with me? Did it feel like it wasn't quite fully explored?
It's more just sort of a series of events that lead you in some meandering way to the next thing that happens, to the next thing that happens, and then to the next thing that happens, and just going until the end. It's not really the idea of let's track the dynamics as everyone grapples with the fact that they're playing with this kid that happens to be a prodigy. It's more about the idea of we're observing the story just as the idea that it is, and the idea is enough.
Also, you can see where this movie's going, right? I mean, I think it's safe to throw some spoilers in here. I think it's safe to just sort of give a blanket statement that we'll be talking spoilers on all of the movies.
You've had enough time, everyone.
Yeah, all the movies that we talk about on this show, I think, will be spoilers unless otherwise noted. But of course, you expect him to lose the ability at the end, like that. I feel like anybody that's seen any of these movies knows that something like that is bound to happen. And then
poor kid's got to keep landing on his shoulder.
I know. People just keep leaving baseballs laying around everywhere.
Can't believe there are baseballs all over this movie about baseballs and baseball fields.
Yeah, it's utterly ridiculous. Why would the Cubs litter Wrigley Field with baseballs?
Baseball is a very important part of what they do. And they just need to have it everywhere.
I do like the idea of Wrigley Field just having random baseballs just everywhere as part of the game. Like that's part of the game. You have to avoid stepping on the baseballs.
The field crew's been on strike, I'm guessing.
According to the year that they were having in this movie, it wouldn't surprise me. Which actually leads me to another aspect of this was John Candy as the announcer. Absolutely wonderful.
He was my favorite part of this movie.
Yeah, I think there's no question. I would love John Candy to just be the announcer of every sporting event that I ever watch, because I just love how pessimistic he was and cynical about everything that was happening. Oh, he's a treasure.
Very much a gift to this movie.
So after Henry loses his ability, he then has to come up with a way because the game's not over. You still got like what, two outs to go?
I think so.
And he's got to come up with something. So he pulls some tricks out of his cleats.
His injured and uninjured and re-injured sleeve.
Yeah. The the way in which he wins by playing dirty, essentially, I'm pretty sure that's got to be against the rules. You know, there's
I'm pretty
rules.
sure it's got to be against the rules to have an 11-year-old on your team.
That's true. But I think also this would not fly. I don't think. So, like, for the first person, he hands off the baseball to the first baseman and keeps the chalk bag and tricks the person on first base to take a lead, and then they tag him, which I don't understand how, like, in what world, even this movie world, I don't understand how that's a thing that the filmmakers were like, yeah, we this is a good idea. We can get away with this. Like, Daniel Stern should have known better.
It's about the spirit of the idea, Adam. Just the notion that this kid, he may not have his magic shoulder anymore, but he's still got a head on it.
That's true. Yeah. It should be noted that there's not a lot of 90s Tude in this movie, but
it's a fairly low Tude event.
It's a fairly low Tude event. I'd give it like probably a 2 or 3 on the Tude scale, but there is that famous line, the pitcher's got a big butt. Pitcher's got a big butt. There's that line where he frequently mocks the other team, but he also surprisingly is disruptive during his own team's batting, which ends up screwing things up as well, or also pitching. Now I think about it, he screwed Busey up when he first got on the team.
He had too much Tude. That's what drives the number up and then back down, is that the Tude isn't used properly.
Yeah, he had a fair amount of Tude, but it just wasn't. It was just like lame Tude. It wasn't edgy, you know. You have the pitcher's got a big butt thing, you know, making fun of the guy's butt, which is, it's all right, but I don't know.
You could do better.
You could do better than that. You could bring it. The 90s brought some hard Tude, so you can do better than that. And then the other trick he does it's equally as ridiculous, and they all win, and it's great. But then since he doesn't have his arm anymore, they say like he's not going to come back, but obviously they would have kicked him off the team anyway.
Oh, definitely. That was just over.
And then guess what? He goes back to being a kid, just being a kid, playing Little League, and he's better now. He's better at Little League now.
The basic trajectory of this movie is that it ends with nothing having changed if you go from one to the other, except that he's slightly less terrible.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And he has a World Series ring.
Oh, that's
as
nice
well.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I guess they didn't show that in the movie, but they win, so presumably he went with them to the World Series and played through all those games. So I don't know.
There's a lot of this movie that's missing.
There really is.
Yeah, you know how on the movie blogs, like all like the blogs that shall not be named because we're on mic right now, whenever there's like a big blockbuster or big movie or something, and the director says, oh yeah, the assembly cut was 4 hours long, and then they go, insert movie here was initially 4 hours long because they don't know how assembly cuts work.
Yeah.
This movie feels like it was actually 4 hours long at one point.
It was an epic.
Yeah.
It was like
everything was fleshed out. The entire season happened. A whole 2 hours of this movie was just devoted to the summer he spent in that cast.
Ken Burns presents Daniel Stern's Rookie of the Year.
I think that's where we are. We've got to release the director's cut. We've got to release the Stern cut. We've got to start our Zack Snyder campaign.
Yeah, let's start a GoFundMe or whatever.
We have to uncover the truth behind Rookie of the Year. This isn't a 90s nostalgia podcast anymore. This is just the Rookie of the Year investigation. This is a 12-part. This is serial.
Every week
we'll go deeper.
Yeah, we'll break down a scene every single week, and then we'll do some digging. We'll make some contacts. We'll reach out to Daniel Stern, get his input. We'll track down Thomas Ian Nicholas, Gary Busey. We'll get them on the show, and we'll get to the bottom of this Rookie of the Year stuff.
This is the Rookiecast.
The Rookiecast.
We will learn the truth.
Now, comparing this to other kids movies. Now, there were a slew of kids movies during this time. Tons of kids movies. Where do you think, obviously you haven't seen all of them, I haven't seen all of them, but where do you think this stands up against the Sandlots and the Angels in the Outfields?
This is not a peak 90s kids movie by any stretch of the imagination, but if you were going to get somebody into like the bizarre, quasi-disturbed depths of 90s kids movies, this is like kind of one you can get them started with, almost because it kind of has so many little tenets of a 90s kids movie, but they're also kind of malformed and amorphous.
I completely agree. I think that this is a good gateway kids movie into the 90s, whereas a lot of them are much more egregious in their 90s-ness, and this one is pretty light when it comes to the 90s rhetoric, but it's a good way to ease into it. And then like movies like Blank Check, I think, take it to a whole new level of 90s. I think The Sandlot is a movie that is even less. Like, I think maybe Sandlot is probably a more perfect movie, because The Sandlot, in a lot of ways, just because it takes place in the 60s, I believe. Is it the 60s? Maybe the early 60s?
1962.
Yeah, that's okay. That's what I thought, early 60s. That movie is more timeless, but it does still contain that sort of that attitude that most kids things of this era brought us.
That's one aspect of watching a movie from a couple of decades ago that's set sometime before that, is it still feels like a movie from its release. It does not feed as much into its period setting, because it also has to have contemporary markings, especially if it's like a movie aimed at kids or something. Yeah,
and we'll definitely talk more about this with our next movie as well.
Yes, I would like to say quite a bit when we get there about the boy from the 1600s in Hocus Pocus that has 90s hair.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the first thing I noticed about that. Any final thoughts on Rookie of the Year?
It's a little bit hard to just sort of sum it up, because there's so many ideas being suggested here that never actually happen, but at the same time, it's just harmless. It's good. It's well intended.
I think that the humor, for the most part, is certainly leaning more heavily towards the youth side of things. I think that a lot of the jokes don't land for adults, but there were still a few things that made me chuckle to myself. And certainly I think that this, it may not hold up to my vision of it as a child, but watching it now, I was still entertained by it, and I felt like, it's fairly harmless. And I would say that it does stand up to a certain degree to the test of time. Again, the next movie we're going to be talking about, I feel very differently about that one. So maybe let's move on and get into our next thing.
We'll be back with more movies after this quick commercial break.
Summer's funner than Sonic. And why is summer funner?
The 50s combo.
A great tasting Sonic burger and order fries, a medium Coke Classic for just $2.29. The 50s combo. And summer's funner with a match 2 to win game. You could win a free Corvette.
One of 15 trips to Cancun.
A free Corvette. Free food. Free Corvette.
Free Coke.
So try the 50s combo. You could win. I wish I could win. Summer's funner at Sonic.
The 90s were a great time to be a kid, in that everything seemed to be marketed towards a younger generation. While the 80s may have paved the way, the kids rule mentality really took over in the 90s with a glut of TV shows, toys, and of course, movies.
Home Alone, The Sandlot, Angels in the Outfield, Blank Check, the list goes on. And our next film, released on July 16th, Hocus Pocus, can be firmly planted in that category.
Back in 1693, the people of Salem, Massachusetts,
Witches?
Yes?
thought they got rid of the Sanderson sisters for good. 300 years later, it's Halloween Eve, and they're back.
Uh-oh. We're home.
Are you boys a little old to be trick-or-treating?
Now they're digging up old friends.
God, what a stench.
And running amok.
Amok.
Looking for the one thing they miss most.
Who stayed for supper?
I'm not hungry.
Oh, but we are.
Only one boy has the power to stop them.
Prepare to die again! You have no powers here, you fool!
Before all Salem falls under their spell.
After 3 centuries, a trio of witch sisters are resurrected in Salem, Massachusetts on Halloween, and it's up to 2 teenagers, a young girl, and a mortal cat to put an end to their reign of terror. So, Adam, what do you think about Hocus Pocus?
This is another one that I was a massive fan of as a kid. I was so into Halloween growing up. My whole family was, actually. We would have these huge Halloween parties, and we would invite all of my friends from school, and everybody would come dress up, and my parents would, we lived in a house that was 100 years old, and it had this really creepy sort of, I can't even describe our basement. We had a really creepy looking basement, and it was huge, and it was big enough that we could put on parties, and my parents would have like games for us, and they would set up like haunted house type stuff for us to walk through, and like our whole house would be decorated for Halloween. Our outside would be decorated for Halloween. So I grew up just absolutely loving and being completely immersed in Halloween anytime for every year. And so when this movie came out, I was naturally drawn to it. And
when this Halloween movie came out in the middle of summer,
in July, I absolutely loved it. This is one that I again would rewatch over and over again. I saw this in the theater. I did not own this on VHS or anything, but I think my neighbor did, and she and I would watch it just nonstop. And I really think that like those early years, and me being so fond of Halloween sort of cultivated my love for horror movies. I think that it's sort of pushed me into that.
It helped build the Adam Patterson we know and love today.
Yeah, I think so. I really think so. I mean, back when I was, I was 9 years old, and I was watching horror movies when I could get a hold of them, or whenever they would put the edited versions of horror movies on TV. So I was consuming horror movies as much as I possibly could, although my parents were pretty good at shielding me from a lot of the more R-rated stuff back then. They sort of gave up, I would say, a year or two later, that once they knew that they were never going to be able to control me watching R-rated movies. So they sort of gave up. But during this time, they were still sort of policing that. But I really loved Hocus Pocus then. Now I found it to be almost insufferable to watch.
Oh,
this was a movie that, again, I have not seen for years. I think I caught part of it maybe a couple years ago on TV, and then I was like, "Ooh, this is a little rough." But watching it now, I was just like, "This is just, it's brutal." I can't get behind this. I think the big thing for me was how annoying the witches were.
The witches were my favorite part of this movie.
You have Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Kathy Najimy as the witches. And they were just so annoying to me. I guess back then, when you're a kid, I think for some reason, I think kids are drawn to annoying things.
Kids are annoying things.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's what it is. They are annoying things, and they're drawn to annoying things. And when you become an adult, you realize that all of those things are terribly annoying. But I was not on board with this movie. There were fun moments. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't really have that much fun watching it. Did you see Hocus Pocus before? Or is this the first time watch?
This is a movie that has definitely had a second life. It kind of came and went without a terrible amount of notice, just in terms of critically and at the box office when it was released. But this is a movie, as someone who grew up in the 2000s and 2010s, this is a movie I remember is always on like basic cable incessantly around Halloween. This is a known quantity for people my age. Like, it's not really a touchstone, but it is something that's always been there. So I was very aware of this movie. It's always on like the Disney Channel or on
ABC Family.
Yeah. So yeah, I had definitely seen this movie before. All of it played very familiar. I didn't really remember it, so this was the first time that I watched it through and really like took note of it. And I had fun. I thought it was fun. It has Bette Midler singing "I Put a Spell on You" in the middle. It just stops the whole movie cold, and it's just her doing her thing.
Which again, how does that make any sense? She's a witch from the 1600s. How does she know the words?
Because she's Bette Midler.
Maybe they were absorbing some knowledge or something. She quickly memorized the lyrics before singing the song. It's a movie that, if you think about any one detail for more than 30 seconds, all the logic falls apart out of it.
I just preemptively realized that, and I just said there is no logic. It is Bette Midler singing "I Put a Spell on You," despite the fact that her character should not know what that is. That is the entire essence of this movie. That is its energy. It's just channeled in that moment.
She shouldn't even know what a microphone is. She instantly somehow knows how to use a microphone, and she shouldn't.
And she plays that crowd. That crowd is there for it.
They are. They're definitely on board. So let's talk about.
They know how to have a good time, Adam.
They do. They were partying hard all night. Let's talk about the plot a little bit. The film starts in like the 1600s, right? And we see the witches as older women. They don't look that much different, to be honest with you. Like Sarah Jessica Parker, her teeth are a little bit more yellow, and they look slightly older, and they're trying to become young again. So they kidnap this girl. And what I don't understand is so they brew up this potion, and they have to feed the potion to the girl, and then they like suck her life out. And her older brother comes in and saves the day, but somehow the girl still gets the potion in her, because I didn't think that she drank it. Did she drink it?
Did she?
Because it looked like they were about to feed it to her, but he goes, "Stop." You know, he jumped in before they gave it to her.
There's a lot going on in this movie, and that's at the very start.
Yeah.
That's my defense.
I don't think they gave her the stuff, but somehow the spell still worked, and they did get younger. And then they ended up casting a spell on the brother, the older brother, to turn him into a cat, an invincible cat.
It has more than 9 lives. Or maybe it only has 9 lives and it just hasn't used any of them up yet.
I don't know. I'm thinking 300 years, he probably would have been run over. I don't know. Maybe if he just stayed into that museum, the house. Anyway.
A very, very cautiously preserving those 9 lives.
So we jump forward 300 years. So the witches get caught and hanged, and 300 years later we have the kid from Erie, Indiana, Omri Katz, as Max. He comes in, and you need to reawake them, or to bring them back from the dead. You have to light this candle, and it has to be a virgin that does it, and that's part of the joke. He's a virgin.
This Disney movie spends an inordinate amount of time obsessing over its main character's virginity.
Yeah. So he lights this candle thinking, because he's the skeptic. He's the new kid coming in from California.
That's another thing. This movie, everybody hates that he's from California.
Yeah. Especially the bullies that he encounters. Ice.
These coastal elitists from California, say these Massachusetts.
So he lights this candle, brings him back, and then they set out to capture all of the kids in the town and suck the life right out of all the kids. And they have to do it before the next day, or else apparently Bette Midler turns to stone and the rest of them explode, or she turns to stone then explodes for some reason. I don't know why the rest of them didn't turn to stone then explode. I guess because she was the leader. She gets to turn to stone first before exploding.
It's a perk.
The entire movie takes place over the course of one Halloween night, and the three witches are chasing them, and they have this book, which is essentially the Necronomicon. It's a book bound in human flesh, and they're trying to keep that from the witches so that they can do make their little brew to suck the life out of all the kids. And it's kind of fun, but again, I found it to be really grating at times. I remember when I was a kid, I thought that Sarah Jessica Parker's character was just so gorgeous. I had a big crush on her back then, but now I find her to be a little bit too much. I
just kind of enjoy just how breezily over the top it is. Like, you can tell that particularly the witches, particularly Bette Midler, they're having a lot of fun with this. They're just sort of carrying the entire energy of this movie, just from scene to scene, just coming in and out. And that's kind of what I was looking for here. That's how I remembered it, I guess. Was just something about it that just seemed vaguely off, and now that I was able to watch it all the way through now for this podcast, I was just able to kind of accept all of the mood around it, and I was just probably more uncritical than I should have been. I think I said on Letterboxd, this is the only thing that could ever convince me that daylight saving time has any practical value, because that's how they trick the witches out, is they mess with their perception of of the sunrise and sunsets with the great line, daylight saving time.
I totally see. First of all, I don't know why this is one of these movies that sort of developed a cult following and sort of became really popular.
It was on TV enough, I guess.
Yeah, I think that might be it. So, like, because it seems like that in a lot of ways, this movie's more popular now than it was back then.
Oh, and definitely feels like it.
When you look at, this is a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. It didn't do very well. And I guess the fact that it is a Disney film, and the fact that every Halloween, ABC Family is playing this movie, maybe it's the younger generation that grew up watching this every year on ABC Family just grew to have some sort of nostalgia for it.
I definitely absorbed the idea that this movie was popular from people my age. I guess that'll be a recurring theme on the show, is that I'm experiencing this all for the first time and you're bringing your nostalgia into it. And I would say in this case, sort of the reverse of what you would usually expect. I feel like I absorbed a lot of positive nostalgia from people my age who have seen it on TV growing up than you did, is just seeing it first run.
Well, I loved it when I was a kid, and I know a lot of people that really loved it as well, but watching it now, I just don't feel like it holds up for me. I mean, it very well may hold up for other people my age that are blind by that nostalgia, but and I fully admit that there's some movies that I am totally nostalgia blind too, but for some reason, this one, I just did not enjoy myself nearly as much as I thought I would. For some reason, the barking, I'm trying to find who was Kathy Najimy's Mary Sanderson. Why was she like barking and growling like a dog all the time?
She's like tracking down the kids.
Oh yeah, that's her special ability, is that she can smell the children. She knows when the children are around.
She's got to channel that, Adam. She's got to channel it.
One thing I will say, so aiding the kids. So you have Max and his little sister Danny, played by Thora Birch. And then you have the love interest, Allison, played by Vanessa Shaw. And it's the three of them trying to fight back these witches. And aiding them is the cat that we mentioned before. What was his name? Binks or Blinks? His name was Thackeray.
Thackeray Binks.
Thackeray Binks. Who oddly, the live action actor playing Thackeray was not the same person that voiced the cat Thackeray.
The time does things to you.
I'm not sure why they got a different
the years can be rough.
I did, just going back to what we talked about earlier, I loved that opening sequence where he has that classic middle part haircut in the 1600s. I'm just
I cannot stop thinking about that.
I was like, oh man, that just, you know who he's actually the guy from Criminal Minds. No, I'm sorry, NCIS. I knew it was one of those procedurals.
Yeah, I used to watch Criminal Minds a lot. I know my Criminal Minds.
Oh, sorry.
I was looking at the cast list. Nothing was ringing a bell here.
I'm the resident Criminal Minds expert here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was NCIS.
All Criminal Minds before 4 seasons ago when I stopped watching.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those shows, but yeah, he's on NCIS. I guess I don't know if he still is or not, but so yeah, he had a decent career afterwards. Again, Max, the guy who plays Max, Omri Katz, Erie, Indiana. If you guys haven't seen Erie, Indiana, one of my favorite shows. It just ran from 91 to 92. So it was a pretty short-lived show, but absolutely incredible. It was sort of like, I don't want to say Tales from the Crypt because that's not quite accurate, because it was the same characters. So it was about this kid and his best friend, and he moved to this town called Erie, Indiana, and he found that there was all this weird stuff happening in the town. So him and this kid that he meets form this investigation duo. So they investigate all these weird things that happen. And I remember one episode was this woman, she was a Tupperware salesperson, and she would actually keep her 2 kids in giant Tupperware containers and preserved them. So it turned out that they were 100 years old, but because they slept in Tupperware every night, it preserved them and kept them as kids.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, if that doesn't make you want to seek out Erie, Indiana, I don't know what will. Tobey Maguire, I believe, had his first acting role as a ghost in Erie, Indiana. Amazing show.
Was this product placement from the Tupperware people? Did they approve this?
I don't know if they actually, I don't think they call it Tupperware in the show. I think they call it something else.
So it's like in the movie Ouija, where the Ouija board kills you, but it's also to sell more Ouija boards.
Yeah. Well, that's what Hasbro. That's Hasbro for you.
I'm sorry, we're getting off track here, but I love how any religious institution has a field day complaining about, things like Ouija boards. They seem like they're games, but they're really evil. It's literally made by Hasbro. It's just a thing.
Yeah. Omri Katz was also in Matinee that came out in 1993.
I watched Matinee the other day.
Yeah, Matinee came out in January.
It's so good.
I know. I love Matinee. I saw Matinee in the theater.
That would be such a good movie to see in a theater.
Yeah, I saw it in a theater when it first came out, and I went to see it with my cousin, and he and I got in a big argument right after the movie, like in the car on the ride home, and it like just totally ruined the experience for me. We got this like big blowout argument, and I was just so upset, and it ruined the whole movie going experience for me. But I watched it again years later and sort of redeemed my memories of it. But classic Joe Dante. It stars John Goodman. It's about William Castle.
William Castle.
Right? So definitely recommend checking out Matinee, not just for the Omri cats. Just a little lukewarm on Hocus Pocus this time around. I felt the tude meter was pretty low. Not a lot of tude happening in this. You got your
except for the extremely anti-California.
Yeah, they stole his shoes.
Yeah.
I do like how they later Ice and his boy got caged, and I love the scene when Henry had the option of letting them out, and he just let him in there. Or sorry, Max, not Henry. I'm still on the other movie. When he decided to just leave them in the cages. So presumably those children did not get out of the cages.
No, they died.
That's like negligent homicide or something. Ice.
That's what you get for being nicknamed Ice. That should count for a few tude points. Who nicknames themselves Ice anymore?
Yeah, I'd give it probably like 2 like 2 points maybe. Because there's really not that much going on. I mean, Thora Birch, her character is Danny. She gives some tude. She has some pretty solid tude. Any final thoughts on Hocus Pocus?
I might rewatch this at Halloween, is what I'll say.
Oh man.
I am a late millennial, early Gen Z convert to the cult church of Hocus Pocus.
It's like right up there with Space Jam. It's like Hocus Pocus and Space Jam. These movies that were not well received that somehow developed these cult followings.
I'm reading that by the late 2000s, early 2010s, maybe still now, maybe the Hocus Pocus revival has done all it can do, but for a while, every year the ABC Family Halloween lineup broadcast with the highest rating every year of the whole program was always Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
The last one before Halloween.
That makes sense. I mean, I know they've been playing that movie, but it just kind of goes to show you that like if you want something to be a hit, just play it over and over again. Like this, like if we just need to play this podcast every year.
Yeah.
Just every year broadcast this episode, and eventually it'll become a cult hit.
Yeah. Finally start collecting those podcast royalty checks that everybody totally gets.
Boy.
Destroy every egg-laying, chest-bursting, acid-spitting alien on the planet, or this nightmare will never end. Alien 3 on Super NES from LJN.
If you happen to pick up Alien 3 for Super Nintendo last month, then listen close, friend, because this month's Cheater's Corner is for you. If you're having trouble getting Ripley through those nasty xenomorphs, then do the following. Begin the game and press A, B, Y, X on controller 2. Press A on controller 1 and a number will appear in the top corner. Re-enter the code on controller 2 and press B or X to increase the number to 5, and you'll get unlimited weapons and invincibility. Got it? Good. Now kick some alien butt. While there were no shortage of family-friendly made-for-TV movies in July of 1993, the Disney Channel original miniseries Heidi comes to mind, followed up by the radical rollerblading movie Airborne later that September. Loved Airborne. We might have to talk about that at some point.
Add it to the list.
The era of the TV movie was in full swing, a topic that we may discuss in a later episode, but
we will discuss in a later episode.
So many TV movies. I mean, we might even want to do try to fit in a TV movie every episode if we can find one that fits.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a bunch of movies produced on a fairly short timetable, many of them of just a way to dramatize things happening in the news.
And a lot of them have been lost to time. Like nobody talks about TV movies very much.
Like they were just pumping them out. Like the thing where apparently the story about the cave rescue in Thailand has already been optioned for a movie. And people thought that was weird. They were jumping on it so fast. If this happened in the mid-90s, it would have been on air already.
Yeah, it really would have. It definitely
would have still been in there and the movie would have been broadcast.
For our final film, we chose a relatively obscure TV movie released on July 5th on Fox, titled 1201.
Barry Thomas is about to experience the most extraordinary day of his life. In just 12 hours, he will lose his job.
I like you, Barry. I really do. You're fired.
He will fall in love, and he will finally meet the woman of his dreams. Then he will have to watch her murder. But what will make this Tuesday even more unforgettable? Is it 1201? Something is going to make it start all over again. Now, one man must uncover the secret.
How come Lisa Frederick's murder was not on TV? It was not in the newspapers, nothing. Lisa's murder?
1201. Starring Jonathan Silverman of Weekend at Bernie's 1 and 2 and Brighton Beach Memoirs.
Adapted from Richard Lupoff's 1973 short story, 1201 follows the same time loop mechanic as Groundhog Day, a film released back in February. In fact, the author attempted to sue the producers of Groundhog Day, but eventually dropped the case after 6 months of legal proceedings.
The film stars Jonathan Silverman as Barry Thomas, an average office worker who develops a crush on one of his co-workers, Lisa Fredericks. After work, Barry witnesses the murder of Lisa and, still reeling from what he witnessed, goes to a bar to get wasted. Later that night, there's a thunderstorm and Barry gets a shock from his lamp due to a faulty wire at exactly 12:01 a.m. The next morning, he realizes that everything is happening exactly as it did the previous day. The next morning, the day is repeated again. It is now Barry's job, being the only person alive who is aware of this time loop, to stop the murder of Lisa and stop the time loop or be caught in it forever. So this is, as you said, Ken, this is pretty much Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day came out earlier in the year, but they, I guess, found that Groundhog Day was somehow ripping off this movie.
I mean, it is based off of a short story that had been around for 20 years by that point.
Certainly, but when you compare the two, when you compare Groundhog Day to this movie, now I never read the short story, but I'm assuming that the short story is the same, pretty much the same as 1201, the movie. They're not, I mean, the time loop thing is the only thing. That's the only similarity between the two. I mean, I guess if you want to really reach, you can say there's the love story angle, but I think that's a pretty far reach. I think that I honestly think that Groundhog Day did it way better. I think that it was more interesting because I didn't really feel like they capitalized quite enough on the time loop mechanic in 1201.
Yeah, I think watching a movie like this, kind of a very, very, very mediocre exercise of the time loop, makes me realize that I don't like the time loop device that much at all.
I think that it's certainly we don't need a lot of it. Any more movies that come out that have the time loop mechanic, I think I will not be on board with. We've had a comedy that there's a movie called Premature that came out a couple of years ago that was like a teen sex comedy about the time loop that had a time loop. There was Happy Death Day that came out last year. That was a pretty well done horror movie that played with the time loop. There was another like a sci-fi horror movie called like, I can't remember what it's called. It was a series of numbers. It was like 1157 or something like that. It was also about the time loop. So you get tons of these time loop movies.
There've been a few. There was also that Before I Fall, which I think was last year.
Yeah.
Which I didn't mind, except for the fact that it was about a time loop. I think my problem with the time loop device is that it's so predicated on the idea that there are a handful of scenes that will have to be repeated over and over, where the plot is not necessarily moving at all, except for the fact the character has to come to terms with the fact that they are in a day that is repeating. And then they try to tell other people, and the other people do not believe them. But I've seen so many of these time loop movies that if someone actually came up to me and said that they were living the same day over and over again, I'd probably believe them.
I'd be like, you're stuck in a time loop? Like immediately.
Yeah, no, I would be there. I would buy it immediately.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about the having to show the same scenes over and over again, I think that Groundhog Day did it probably the best in that even when it repeated, it was still funny because they made it different enough that, you know, like Bill Murray's interaction with Stephen Tobolowsky and just those little sort of interstitial scenes that made it enjoyable to rewatch it. I think Happy Death Day did a pretty good job of it too, just because they zoomed after like the first two, they zoomed through the day up until like when new stuff started to happen. I think that 1201 was not good at it. I think that they did it.
Really a fan of the same like 3 to 5 events.
Yeah, I think that they were absolutely horrible at the mechanic. Now, one interesting thing about 1201 is that they actually try to explain why the loop is happening. And I'm not sure that any of these other movies really get into it, other than the fact that, like, they don't really try to explain the loop. They're just like, well, they're in a time loop. Like that's just the way it is.
And you can do that now. Everybody's familiar with it. It's like they're in a time loop.
Yeah. But 1201 actually tried to scientifically explain what was going on. See, Jonathan Silverman works for this company that built this machine that malfunctions and causes it to happen, but it just so happens that he gets electrocuted when the loop occurs, so he remembers everything. I don't know how that, somehow exempts him from time loop status, but it does. And
it does.
So you have that, and then you have him trying to save Helen Slater, who gets killed at the end of every day. But also, he's got to make time to romance her and get her to fall in love with him.
That is such a weirdly underdeveloped and unnecessary device of this.
Yeah, it is. It really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you have Martin Landau as Thaddeus Moxley, Dr. Thaddeus Moxley, who.
That is a great name.
He's the creator of this machine. And then, of course, you have Jeremy Piven in there as the douchey coworker, handing him the disc that shocks him every day, and dismantling his chair. Like, that's all he has to do. Like, you don't have actual work to do. It probably took him at least 30 minutes to dismantle that chair.
To dismantle the chair. When does he get? Did he get to work early that day just so he could dismantle the chair?
I don't know. No, I think because he does it later. So.
Oh, yeah.
So after Jonathan Silverman leaves, then he does it when he comes back.
I've seen like 5 movies in the past 2 days. They're all running together.
So Jonathan Silverman's horrible in this. He is, I feel like he's doing his best Jimmy Stewart impersonation throughout this whole movie.
He's really trying.
It's so rough. And like, he tries to be like a goofball. Like, he's trying to be funny, And at first the dialogue seems to be entirely, it's moving way too fast. And it almost feels like we're watching like some kind of old talkie or something written by Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah, yes, and Aaron Sorkin in a very poor environment.
Yeah. So yeah, Jonathan Silverman, not very good. Not very good in this at all. I really despised his character actually, which
The West Wing after Aaron Sorkin left. There, we'll go with that one.
There you go. Because he's the main character and we spend the whole time with him, that made it very difficult for me to really enjoy this movie. Now, I should note that I watched it twice because when we were first doing research for this show and putting it together and deciding what we wanted to cover and how we wanted to do it, one of the first things I did when we landed on a date was I watched this movie because I knew that this came out and I was like, oh, let me watch it. That was like 2 months ago. So in that amount of time, I forgot literally everything that happened in this movie. So I had to rewatch it again today. And the whole time I'm like, oh my God.
I watched it last night and you're telling me things that I've already forgotten.
It's a very, very forgettable endeavor.
Your memory of this is better than mine. When did you first see it? Did you see it on the original air date?
No, I didn't even know about this movie, actually. This is one that I have no backstory with whatsoever.
I had never heard of it.
No, I never heard of it either. I only heard of it while researching July of 93. So I never knew that it existed at all. But as soon as I read it, and as soon as I read about how the creators tried to sue the author of the author of the original short story tried to sue the Groundhog Day folks, that's sort of what piqued my interest. And then looking at that beautiful cover with the clock, the clock and the
glowy clock and all the glowy people. And
I saw that cover and I was completely sold.
Clearly not like this was not a cover taken from an actual publicity shoot. This is clearly just images extracted from the movie put on the cover.
Oh yeah. Interestingly, I think it was like New Line Cinema that made this.
Yeah, New Line's credit comes up at the start.
It feels like, now it's possible that New Line they're the ones that handled the home video release of this. So I think that this was actually released on home video. So they might have just handled that, and Fox actually made it because it did air on Fox. So that's
I
possible.
do remember seeing the New Line Cinema like title card in the movie though.
Yeah, at the beginning, right?
Yeah, no, not the studio logo, the actual title card that says New Line Cinema over the actual film.
Oh, I see. I don't know how TV movies work because we so rarely get TV movies these days.
Yeah.
We get like nowadays we get limited series.
Yeah, I think we should hedge that. We get TV movies, but they're like good TV movies. They're HBO TV movies. We don't get like network TV movies.
Yeah, that is so rare. And more than anything, we get limited series. So we'll get like Sharp Objects on HBO. Great example.
Have you watched that? How is that?
That's too early for me to say. I enjoyed the first episode, but I don't know where it's going. It's just I don't really have an opinion on it just yet. I think I need to see one or two more episodes to decide if I'm going to stick with it. I don't know how many episodes it's going to be. It might only be like 6 or something, but intriguing so far. I'll watch more. It didn't completely get its hooks in me, but yeah, it's okay.
All right.
I do want more. Now, there are cable channels that still do TV movies. Lifetime. That's Lifetime is a great example of a channel that still makes its bread and butter off of TV movies. I think that,
and like sort of the vaguely lurid 90s network style TV movies.
Yeah.
That don't really have any genuine value. The Hallmark Channel TV movies, there's a whole fan base around Hallmark Channel movies. They're nice. They're I think the word that everybody uses, they're cozy. Like there's a whole podcast about cozy entertainment, and that's what it is. It's cozy entertainment produced on a level that just nobody else would bother to make those movies, but producing them for people who can appreciate them. And it's just there on the Hallmark Channel, as opposed to somewhere like Lifetime, which is just making the movies that were being shown on the major networks 20 years ago.
Now I don't know if this is a great example of a made-for-TV movie, because to me, this felt more like a regular theatrical movie. I mean, it even has an MPAA rating and everything. So to me, this feels more like just a straight-to-video movie than a TV movie. I'm sure in the future we'll be covering more made-for-TV movies that just really feel like made-for-TV movies.
The insert current figure in the news name story.
like Lorena Bobbitt, like the Lorena Bobbitt story, or Amy Fisher, or
truly the stories that TV movies were made for.
Yeah. So there you have varying degrees of TV movie, and I'm wondering if maybe this was made for a theatrical release and just didn't get it, and then they were like, all right, let's just dump it on Fox.
It feels like something that was at some stage supposed to be a theatrical release.
There's some some kind of CG effects going in this one. It was interesting, like in other time loop movies, usually the character just goes to bed or just wakes up, you know, when it resets, they just wake up in bed. In this, there's this whole thing that happens where they have to be sure to show us a clock, because it doesn't seem to happen anywhere but right on a clock, where the clock starts to warp and then the time loop happens. I wonder what everything else looks like other than the clock.
Yeah.
Is it just clocks that have the warping effect, or does everything warp?
I don't know.
So many questions about.
You throw in little elements like there, and then you just want to start pulling at that thread and seeing where it goes.
Not so much with this movie, though.
Yeah.
Not so much.
I could see that there could have been a thread, but I did not want to say that I was going to pull it.
There wasn't even, it just wasn't really that fun. It was just pretty boring, and
the only thread was that clock thing.
Yeah. The clock thing is definitely.
And the robot clock on his,
Yeah, the robot clock. What was that all about? Was getting some Pee-wee's Big Adventure vibes from that.
Yeah.
Like he works in personnel. So like when you first see that robot, you think, oh man, he's like an inventor, right? Like he works in the lab, and he's going to be the guy that does something to mess this thing up, causing the loop. But no, he works in personnel.
No, he just,
and he just happens to have this robot that talks to him, this robot clock.
Really kind of a missed opportunity there.
I loved his oversized suit, though. The 90s suit was on point. He had an incredible suit.
Wonderful suit.
Pretty low on the toot as well. I'd probably
basically no.
Yeah, I'd probably give it a 1. There's this one scene that happens a few times with this kid, these two kids throwing the football around, they must be throwing this football around at like 7 a.m. And you have this other guy sitting out on the lawn reading the paper, drinking a beer at, I would assume, is very early in the morning.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the kid says, but it's definitely some sort of catchphrase. I think he says like, up yours, or something like that. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about 1201. It's not really worth seeking out. I think that there's probably a reason that nobody knows about this movie.
This is the kind of like movie that you could probably find on YouTube because, you know, who cares enough to start, you know, really adding that to the ID content database.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely find it on YouTube. I can tell you that for a fact. Wink, wink.
Yeah, this is yeah. We wouldn't know, of course. It apparently was released on DVD, and that is obviously where we saw it.
Of course.
Yes, but yeah, this whole project feels like it was supposed to be a theatrical release at one stage, and then went to Fox where it got buried on. This had to have aired on like a Saturday or something. And then, yeah, this whole project was about people losing money.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. All right. That is 1201.
Martin Landau explodes at the end.
Oh, yes, that's right.
I just thought about that. That's the last thing we need to mention to people.
I did want to mention
is that it has a pretty incredible...
And they go to jail. They go to jail.
Yeah, that's the happy ending.
Martin Landau explodes, and the two leads go to jail. Presumably for the murder of Martin Landau.
Yeah, that, like... What's their defense? Explaining the time loop again.
But in the movie, they didn't...
They're going away for life.
The funny thing was, in the movie, they didn't call it a time loop. They called it a time bounce, which... was so silly to me. Like, why not call it I mean, I guess they just didn't have the term for it, but to call it a time bounce, I don't know.
The time loop device had been around for long enough. I'd have to think it had a name by then.
You would think so, but they did not call it a time loop. They called it a time bounce in that movie.
So yeah, that's the ending. Martin Landau explodes, and then Jonathan Silverman and Helen Slater, I am going to assume, probably go to jail for life. That is a life sentence to blow someone up with a giant whatever that was supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't even know what it was supposed to be. It was like a laser. It was like this laser thing.
At the best, they can use the insanity defense once their lawyers hear about them claiming that they're in a time loop. And that's the happy ending.
Yep. It was like billed as a happy ending too. Like they kissed and it was playing the happy music. Score was pretty good in that movie. I'll tell you that. That's one good thing. The score was okay. It felt very Amblin-esque. All right. I think that's going to do it. Thank you so much for listening to our inaugural episode. If you dig it, please consider reviewing us on iTunes. Since this is a brand new show, your review will go a long way. We'll be back next month with another installment, but until then, you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook at 90spod. And be sure to send us feedback and topics you want to hear us discuss at feedback@filmpulse.net. For Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson, and this has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.